Now, one of the things that the problems when we talk about getting along really deals with personalities. There's so many different personalities you have to deal with, and when somebody doesn't see the world the way you do, what happens? They think you're difficult. They think you have a problem in that area. And let me ask you this, just by a show of hands, how many of you have ever dealt with somebody difficult in this room? Okay, so, okay, let me ask you another question. How many are difficult? Boy, this is tough. I'm going to get out of here now. It's looking a little dangerous. And how many of you realize, you got double hands back there, I saw somebody. How many of you realize that some of the things you do cause other people to be difficult? Okay, we have a bad day, we're in a bad mood and stuff like that. And the point is, people are not necessarily difficult, they're what? Anybody want to yell that out? They're difficult, they're aggressive, they're obnoxious. Okay, that's not the answer I'm looking for. They're different. Yeah, people are not necessarily difficult, but they're what? They're different. And the key is, as I said, from a work perspective, people are always judging you by these areas. I had an opportunity to do some work for a company called Agilent Technologies. They're out in California. And after my presentation, I sat down with the president, and I had to write this on a napkin because I said, what's the key to working together and getting along? And he said this. I thought this was an interesting quote. He said, 50% of all our obstacles to success center around team dynamics. But then he said this, he said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And what that means, it's not different cultures from different countries, but if you don't get along, or if I don't get along with you, or you don't get along with me, guess what? We're not going to work. You can have all the plans, the strategies, everything you want, and nothing's going to happen until you work on those other issues that come about. So to help you in that area, what I'd like to recommend, there's a phrase I put in one of my books here. It's called, what is your rule book? And what your rule book means that we've sort of talked about this, but everybody sees things through different lenses. We all have different realities about how life should be. And if somebody doesn't follow those guidelines, there's trouble with them. So we've got to look at our shoulds and should nots that get in the way of doing things. And what I'd like you to do, what I'm going to do real quickly, I just want to read something to you. And I want you to think about this because I want you to check out your own rule book. And by the way, one thing I would recommend on this too is check out your own rule book and see where the shoulds or your ego getting in the way of you doing things. So just listen to this real quickly. It says, we each have an invisible edition of our personal rule book deeply ingrained in our brains. These guidelines define our expectations, desires, how others should treat us, what we believe is right, fair, and just, and how the world and its people should behave. We judge people by our book. We have rules about being courteous, extending appreciation, acknowledging work, honoring time, demonstrating concern, being compassionate, delivering service, and the degree of effort required for projects. We have rules about how fast people should return phone calls and emails, reply to requests, respond with answers, handle problems, pitch in on projects, and most importantly, what people generally should do and what they shouldn't. The rules all serve as our indivisible code of conduct with expectations of reciprocal exchange or else. So if somebody doesn't do the same thing that you think the way it should be, that's when we get into trouble. So I want you to take a good look at your rule book and where is your shoulds, your ego, your should nots getting in the way of you being successful. By the way, if you want a less stressful life too, what happens? You start this, you don't get stressed out on anybody anymore, which is one of the keys that we're looking for today. So to help you with this, although there are going to be people who annoy you and get in your way and you have problems with all the time, but to be less stressful, what I'd like to recommend is I look at people as little kids. For example, everybody, and I don't mean to psychoanalyze anybody here, but I have that kind of background, but when you were 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, you were fed certain messages from your parents, your ministers, your teachers, all these people messages, and now when you're working in the work world, you're doing what? You're coming across with those messages to other people. When they don't do the things you do, we get into trouble, and this gets into conflicts and all sorts of problems. So what I like to do is I like to look at people from little kids, and some of you may have seen this on the internet, but it's like, how many of you have ever seen this one, Kids' Views on Marriage? Anybody seen this? Nobody's seen this. Okay, nobody's on the internet here. But anyway, there's a little thing they ask kids their views on marriage. So these are people, just take them 30 years later on how they're going to deal with life. But just listen to this. It's the first question they ask of Alan, who's only 10 years old. They asked him, how do you decide who to marry? And he said, you've got to find somebody who likes the same stuff. Like if you like sports, she should like it that you like sports, and she should keep the chips and dip coming.